My thanks to Melissa, Steve, Charlie, Jason, and Joyce in Alabama. That does it for our hour. I'm Nicole Wallace. MTP Daily starts right now. Chuck's going to have first wave exit poll data in his hour. Don't miss a second of it. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, Nicole. It's the best part of working here, right? On an election night, we get some exits.
Is backing more today and taking a very controversial shot at Senator Gillibrand, which she then responded to and called a sexist smear. So, is all of that enough fireworks for this unusual night in American politics? Apparently not, because I can also report for you that Senator Elizabeth Warren jumped in to get Gillibrand's back and make what appears to be a senatorial first, chiding a sitting U.S. president for, quote, slut-shaming. Our special coverage tonight is led by political experts and journalists in Alabama, including an Alabama Trump delegate who's come out against Moore, plus political experts across the South and Washington, where Republicans are wondering if they might be losing a key vote for tax reform. A lot on the line. I begin with Crystal Ball, a former Democratic congressional candidate and current president of the People's House Project, which recruits candidates in Republican-held districts. She's also the author of Reversing the Apocalypse, Hijacking the Democratic Party to Save the World, and she is my colleague and friend. I'm also joined by attorney Michelle Bernard, president of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, and author of Women's Progress. Crystal, we don't know anything yet as polls close soon, but they have not closed. What do you think is on the line, and what are you watching for in this very special night in American politics?
Well, right now I'm just waiting to find out whether I'm going to be drinking in celebration or despair. So that's what's at stake for me personally. But, you know, Ari, I think one thing we can say definitively right now from a Democratic Party perspective, from my perspective, is that it pays to compete everywhere. If you had said months before that Alabama would be competitive, people would have told you that's insane. But what we see is when we really field quality candidates, no matter where they are, we get in the race, we force the other side to spend money, and we get in position to take advantage of unusual circumstances. And tonight and this moment in history is full of all kinds of unusual circumstances.
Very unusual, and you make such an important point that relates to some of the things that people think are boring in politics, like what is the registration deadline and how organized are you to have, as you put it, candidates in the field. Michelle, take a listen to the wife of Roy Moore making something of a closing argument about the identities of people they say are their friends last night.
Fake news would also have you think that my husband doesn't support the black community. We have many friends that are black. Fake news would tell you that we don't care for Jews. One of our attorneys is a Jew.
Michelle Bernard, comment as you see fit.
So I've got a term for you that a psychologist friend of mine that I increasingly turn to for help in figuring out what on earth is going on in the country gave me a term today called folie à deux, and it's basically French, and it means shared madness. And what she described to me today is that the whole country, particularly the state of Alabama, is living in the shared madness of Donald Trump and what has become Donald Trump's America. You look at Roy Moore's wife, and she appears to have absolutely no clue whatsoever that she just demonstrated blatant racism by explaining to us that they've got a Jew who works in the campaign and they have lots of friends that happen to be black. It is absolutely so absurd, particularly when you look at his wife and all of the things that are on the table. I mean, let's face it, one of the most important things, at least from my perspective, that is on trial tonight is does the state of Alabama, does the President of the United States, does the United States Congress care about the lives of girls and women and children? It is the most important issue of the night from my perspective. The entire country is on trial. What does our democracy mean? Remember, Roy Moore is the man who once said that the United States Constitution should have stopped after the 10th Amendment. You're a lawyer. You know what that means. Women's rights came after the 10th Amendment. The abolition of slavery came after the 10th Amendment. The right of African Americans to vote came after the 10th Amendment, but he thinks the country should have stopped then.
You put it so well, and you combine that with his record of flouting the law, being removed as a judge because of his refusal to follow orders, not a quality, not a quality looked for in a judge. And yet what we're seeing, at least in exit polls tonight, is how tight some of the issues are. We're not, of course, reporting yet on anything regarding the outcome. The polls are open. I want to broaden our discussion, so both of you stay with me, but I want to bring in a panel here. Leah Wright-Rigueur is a professor at Harvard University. Michelle Cottle, who writes for The Atlantic today, that shame is a potent cultural force in this moment unless you're dealing with a man like Trump, for whom the term is meaningless, and Laura Payne, a Trump supporter, an Alabama delegate to the 2016 GOP convention who's come out against Roy Moore. And for that reason, Laura, I start with you. If you're against Moore and you are a former Trump delegate here, who did you vote for today, and what are you seeing?
I hate to say I'm against Moore, but I'm really just for a write-in Republican. I support the Republican agenda. I won't say I'm against Moore because, I mean, he's a human being like everybody else, and I feel like the rhetoric's been pretty harsh with him, and I understand people's views when they hear the things that have come out of the campaign or from his mouth. But it's different here when you know people.
But you made a decision as a longstanding Republican not to vote for him. I don't mean, I mean, in politics we use so many words. I don't mean to overuse the A word against to mean you're against his entire, presence on earth. But you, as I understand it, there is a reason why you decided not to vote for him today.
Yes, and I did not vote for him, and I want to support the Republican agenda, but I did not feel like I felt like some of the women were credible. I felt like some of the women's allegations, especially the 14-year-old, they haven't been discredited. I mean, I think that her word is all we can go on, and we don't know who is guilty or who's innocent of what. But just from looking at the information that I've seen and reading the Washington Post article, and I thought they vetted it very well, I can't help but just to think that there may be something there. As Senator Shelby said, where there's smoke, there may be fire. So that's kind of the way I look at it, too. And plus his years on the Supreme Court. He didn't uphold the law then, and maybe it was for moral, religious reasons, and I understand that. But when you're elected to an office, it's also the people's office, and I feel like that he should have, done more with his job and used it appropriately to make a difference versus just take a stand and be suspended twice.
Michelle Cottle and then Leah Wright-Rigueur, your views on what we're seeing tonight.
Well, look, Laura's the kind of voter that the Moore campaign was trying to reach with their, efforts to discredit the women. They didn't try to, argue that this was okay or whatever. They were just like flat out, these women can't be believed. This is all a plot by the Washington and national media. Steve Bannon's down there saying people are going to try to come in and tell you how to vote. Don't you fall for that. And what they were trying to do is make people turn this into a contest between Alabama values and the rest of the country. They didn't want this to be about Roy Moore. They wanted this to be about cultural pride. And for voters like Laura, it was down to kind of what does your conscience tell you about these allegations, and it obviously the entire election will hinge on to some degree which way these people decided to go.
Leah and then Crystal.
Right. So win or lose, the Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump and Roy Moore. This is who they want representing them. This is who they have kind of stumped for. This is who they have come out in support of. And that is incredibly damaging, particularly as the Republican Party once again tries to reinvent itself, as it does every couple of decades or so. I think one of the things to watch here is how are black voters responding to this election, and in particular to Roy Moore. And they are not having it. They are not happy. This is widening the gulf, an already wide gulf between black voters and the Republican Party, and has done lasting damage. And I would really think about what are the national implications for that, even beyond this election.
Yeah.
And Ari, if I could just lay one other piece on the table here. I mean, Roy Moore is what you get when you buy into a sort of apocalyptic vision of politics, which is exactly what Steve Bannon promotes, this us versus them idea, this, you know, you'd rather have anybody in there than a Democrat, our values are at stake, clash of civilizations. If you buy into that view that the world will end if your party doesn't win, then that can lead a person to supporting all sorts of abhorrent behavior, like what has been alleged against Roy Moore. So I think Roy Moore in Alabama is the logical outcome of exactly the Steve Bannon and Donald Trump view of the world and the country.
Michelle,
can I add?
sure,
Ari,
Michelle Bernard, and then Michelle Cottle, speak to that because I know your piece today was about that.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add again. I'm going to go back because I think we got to keep taking it back to women, and I'm looking at the history of the state of Alabama. They've had 2 women in the Senate in the history of the state. Both women were appointed. Both were in office for 5 months only, and both have sort of checkered past. And so I'm looking back at history, and I'm wondering if it's going to repeat itself. And I'll give you an example. Dixie Bibb Graves, she was appointed by her husband, who was the governor and was also her first cousin. She was a women's rights advocate, but she, you know, when she had an opportunity to vote against anti-lynching legislation, she spoke impassioned about it. She was, as it was reported, but she still voted against passing anti-lynching legislation in the state of Alabama because of the fear of the states losing rights and losing sovereignty. Hopefully, I am hoping that tonight the state of Alabama has put that checkered past behind them and that we will see women step forward, say that they believe in their girls, that they believe in women, and they do not put Roy Moore in the United States Senate.
Michelle Cottle.
It's not all about that. It's not about believing the women with a lot of voters. They don't believe these stories, these allegations about the women. The majority of these voters that are voting Republican do not believe the allegations. I'm in the minority, especially when Gloria Allred represents one of them, and she documented the some information under the signature and didn't come out with it, you know, 100% like she should have. That discredits her story, and it's unfortunate. But it does, and this election is not just about Roy Moore. It's about the Republican Party wanting to take back their agenda, wanting to support Donald Trump in the White House. It's much larger than Roy Moore. So whoever wins tonight, it's not just about Roy Moore. Now, the national press and media want to make it where it's about Roy Moore, but in Alabama, it's not just Roy Moore. He's what we've got. These allegations came out after he won, and this is what we've got. And a lot of these voters are voting Republican because of a Republican agenda, not necessarily for the man.
Well, and Laura, that's why you're here, because you bring that perspective. What I want to do is put up a factoid about it and let Michelle Cottle respond. I'm using full names because I got multiple Michelles, but we do have the exit polls on what people believe, and we see this with Alabama voters. Definitely or probably true is about half, and then you have probably false and definitely false. You have a real split, which is also split, Michelle Cottle, on partisan lines. Is that, given all of the reporting and contemporaneous and documentary evidence here, problematic? And what did you want to say in response to Laura's point?
Yeah, it's absolutely problematic, and it's what we were talking about earlier, which is that the Moore campaign has tried very hard to not make this about, you know, what Moore may or may not have done. They've just tried to discredit the entire reality that these women have presented, and it is a bit of a, you know, it's a similar playbook page to what Donald Trump has done in many cases, which is you have a reality that you don't like, so you present an alternative one. Facts are very fungible. You create your own story, and you tell people that anything that doesn't agree with that is a lie. It's fake news.
And in some sense, that when you say that about people, there's an argument that you're trying to disappear people themselves, which is a big problem, but a big part of the debate. What I want to do is fit in a break. We got special election coverage. Crystal, Michelle Bernard, please stay with me. I got something else to ask you about. Leah, Michelle Cottle, and Laura, thank you very much for being a part of our show tonight. Coming up, there is a lot of explosive energy here, including Donald Trump accused of trying to, quote, slut shame a leading Democratic senator. And the other big story, the Trump legal team is out on all cylinders, even with this being special election day. They're calling, number one, for a second special counsel to investigate the DOJ itself. And number two, Ty Cobb making some news with a big claim I'm going to tell you later in the show. Also, Another big issue that could play a big role that is not getting enough attention. It has to do with children's health. All that ahead. I'm Ari Melber, and this is a special edition of The Beat on MSNBC.
Way to align himself with Roger Ailes, with Bill O'Reilly, after they were accused of different forms of sexual harassment in the 90s. He also defended Mike Tyson when he was accused and convicted of rape. So if Donald Trump again has nothing that he's hiding, he is not a predator, he all these women are lying against him, why does he want to prove it? Why won't they just let an ethics investigation happen for for that cloud to be lifted?
Right, and this is on the night of the special election with him digging in on these issues. Liz Plake and Crystal Ball, thank you both.
Thank you, Ari.
Thanks.
President Trump's lawyer now calling for a new special counsel to investigate who? The Justice Department. I have a special report explaining why that matters tonight. And some other breaking news on the Mueller probe. This just came into the newsroom. The White House lawyer says he has an announcement. I'll explain next. Alabama residents rushing to vote right now before polls close in the next 2 hours. Republicans trying to defend a Senate majority that can swing with the change of just 2 seats. It all happens as the nation's political class is obsessing over Alabama today. And yet, President Trump has a lawyer who just uncorked a call for a new special counsel to investigate the DOJ and the FBI. Today, Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow citing a Monday night Fox News report that a senior DOJ official, Christopher Orr, is married to a staffer for the firm behind the Trump-Russia dossier.
House Intelligence Committee staff uncovered that Orr met last year with both Christopher Steele, the former British spy who authored the dossier with input from Russian sources, and that Orr also met last year with Glenn Simpson, the founder of Fusion GPS. Nellie Orr, an academic Russia expert and the wife of Bruce Orr, worked for Fusion GPS last year.
Sekulow telling Axios today the Department of Justice and FBI cannot ignore the multiple problems that have been created by these obvious conflicts of interest. These new revelations require the appointment of a special counsel to investigate. A call for a second special counsel during a period when some Trump allies have been attacking special counsel Mueller's probe. Now, I asked Sekulow myself if this new special counsel request is some kind of effort to turn the tables on the direction of the Justice Department and Mueller specifically. He is a DOJ employee. Sekulow telling The Beat, quote, "This is about an alleged conflict regarding Fusion GPS and Bruce Orr, and it has nothing to do with Bob Mueller or Mueller's team." Sekulow's statement in the Fox reporting sites are not about Mueller, and the push comes amidst escalating attacks on Mueller, as Rachel Maddow noted last night.
A pretty good portion of the American right has decided to declare that the new conservative crusade in America will be that former FBI Director, Special Counsel Robert Mueller should be fired. That's the new crusade. Some switch somewhere flipped.
A lot happening right now when you take a step back and look at it. The White House legal team stresses it is cooperating with Mueller, turning over evidence, doing plenty of interviews, and they say they're doing that regardless of the outside conservative media. Sekulow has also raised questions before about Jim Comey's actions and the road that led to Mueller's appointment.
An illegally leaked memo of conversations that he had with the President of the United States was the basis for which a special counsel was put in place.
Now, let me be clear and let me be fair. Lawyers often have legal strategies that run on multiple tracks. They can cooperate with the probe while laying a groundwork for later questions or challenges or lawful appeals. That's their job. But let's be clear tonight, as this call for a special counsel rocks Washington, a second special counsel would require evidence of a crime, number one, and a conflict, number two, and something that the public interest warrants, number three, under the rules. So even if you presume there is a conflict for the DOJ investigating its own lawyer with ties to the Trump-Russia dossier, neither the Fox News report nor the president's lawyer have said what the alleged crime here would be, because conflicts lead to recusals, not typically jail. And having a spouse working at an intel firm is not typically a crime. So there's a lot going on even during the night of the Alabama special election, with the White House for the first time this year saying they want a new special counsel. And that's not all. As I was walking on set tonight, we got this news. A White House lawyer saying on the record, quote, "All the White House interviews are over." That is the first time we've heard anything that definitive. So a lot coming out of the White House legal team right now. All eyes, of course, still politically on Alabama and the Roy Moore race. And as Moore's wife was saying last month, we hear more about Moore and less about Russia.
All of the very same people who were attacking President Trump are also attacking us. I personally think he owes us a thank you. Have you noticed you're not hearing too much about Russia?
Have you? Well, I'm going to bring in California Congressman Eric Swalwell, who serves on the Judiciary Committee. Good evening on a very big night. I want to ask you point blank, is there, in your view, grounds for any kind of second special counsel? And what is your response to the president's lawyer saying that their call is not about Bob Mueller's probe?
Good evening. No, there are no grounds for this call. It actually is more obstructive behavior, and it is not what cooperating with an investigation looks like. And this is in furtherance of obstruction that we've seen in the past week. The president and his son are now asserting an attorney-client privilege that they believe prevents Donald Trump Jr. From telling the House Intelligence Committee conversations he had with his father about the June 9th meeting, where the subject setting up the meeting was Clinton, Russia, private and confidential. And so, they do not want to cooperate. They want to obstruct, they want to delay, they want to disrupt, and I just see this in furtherance of that.
When you say obstruct, Congressman, do you mean that you interpret this as an effort to obstruct the Mueller probe, or are you saying something more broad?
No, I believe this is an effort to undermine and obstruct the Mueller probe. But I also believe if he were to fire Mueller to, continue along the line of obstruction, that would be obstruction of justice, which would be grounds for referral to the House Judiciary Committee.
Let me play for you some of what we've heard recently, because we don't know exactly why we're hearing so much all of a sudden, but there were days after Flynn, days of conservative media criticism, and now, as I mentioned, two different avenues coming out of the White House legal team. Here is some of the media criticism on Fox News and elsewhere of Bob Mueller.
Another day, another story that exposes just how corrupt
politically corrupt as one special counsel, that of Robert Mueller.
There is a cleansing needed in our FBI and Department of Justice. It needs to be cleansed of individuals who should not just be fired, but who need to be taken out in handcuffs.
Is that criticism fair game, or do you have concerns about it?
No, it's not fair game. Bob Mueller, Purple Heart recipient, is braver on his weakest day than Donald Trump or anyone on his team on their best. I mean, he is somebody who served our country honorably, appointed by a Republican, led us through the reforms needed after September 11th, and is the person that we need right now. And I believe that whatever he finds, the country will accept. And actually, I hope that Republicans in Congress speak up and put an end to this nonsense, this effort to drag his name through the mud to further Donald Trump's narrative on what happened with Russian interference.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much. I turn now to Ron Hoskow, a former assistant FBI director. Ron, I didn't know that during our Alabama special election coverage, we would be zeroing in on a lot of news coming out of the White House. Dealer's choice, your view of the call for a second special counsel, the claim it has nothing to do with the Bob Mueller probe, and the announcement on the record by White House counsel Ty Cobb that all White House interviews are, quote, over.
Well, let me go with the former. I won't go as far as the congressman, but I do see this as really a distraction. First, the Department of Justice has an inspector general. That inspector general is currently taking a look at Jim Comey's decision-making, the involvement of the FBI deputy director in the Clinton investigation. And I think that inspector general has repeatedly shown itself very independent of the department, of the FBI, of the components in their reviews of their work. So I think that Inspector General is very capable of taking a look at
But Ron, what you know, I just want to make sure everyone understands who's watching. You're making a distinction that Mr. Horowitz, the internal police watchdog there, can look at whether any policies were violated, and they were already looking at that with Jim Comey. But it's not nothing, I don't think, when a lawyer who works for the president is calling for a criminal probe. A special counsel wouldn't be about policy. It'd be the idea that there's an alleged crime.
Yeah, and as you tick off the requirements to designate a special counsel, I don't see them as being met.
Right.
But I do see this as perfect fodder for the Inspector General to look at Bruce Orr, to make a hard determination and potentially a fairly quick determination as to whether he has met his ethical requirements within the department, disclosing the relationship and the potential for a conflict of interest, and then taking a look at whether Bruce himself, and full disclosure, I know Bruce Orr. I'd worked with him in my time at the FBI. Whether Bruce participated in meetings, whether he had an interest in the outcome of meetings and determinations.
Well, Ron, if you know him, and I've talked to some of these people, I talked to Jay Sekulow, if we know these people, maybe this segment needs to be investigated. That is an investigation joke about a serious topic. But the last thing I got to get your comment on is Ty Cobb, who speaks to the press, who I've interviewed, and it's helpful when he does speak on the record, is saying something on the record. He's saying the White House interviews are over in the Mueller probe. Could that be true?
I can't see how it would be. You know, frankly, I see this as an investigation by Bob Mueller and company that would take many, many months and potentially a couple of years. You're talking about a lot of people, a lot of transactions, overseas transactions, transactions on many levels, probably banking and financial transactions with foreign institutions. I think that's a complicated case that's going to take months and months and months. I'd be shocked if it's over.
Ron, I won't ask you about Alabama. That's what we're going to go back to next. Thank you, as always, for your law enforcement expertise. Next, we go live to Birmingham. New results on the exit polls of what is going on there. And how did voting laws affect election coverage? We're looking at live pictures there. A lot going on in Alabama. We are close now to polls closing, 8 p.m. Eastern, so just under an hour and a quarter. Let me tell you about some of the exit polls. We don't know anything about who's going to win, but we do know that 60% of Alabama voters said they have made up their mind a long time ago, before November. Very significant in this race, because that was before the Washington Post expose that alleged sexual misconduct against Roy Moore, which we can tell you first broke November 9th. With a lot going on, I want to get out to the field. CNBC's editor-at-large John Harwood in Birmingham. He's right there over the shoulder at the Doug Jones election night headquarters. It could be a big night or a sad night there. We just don't know. And Michelle Bernard is back with me. Mr. Harwood, what are you seeing on the ground? What did you learn today being there? And how are you parsing what I continue to stress are mood exit polls, not results exit polls, but that suggest this was a split decision, at least for a lot of people who talked to the exit pollsters?
I would say there's cautious optimism among Democrats about this race. Ari, at no point in the campaign have I ever heard any of the Doug Jones people, even at the lowest point for Roy Moore, say they thought we have this won or we're on track to win. But at no point have I heard them say we're out of the game. They've gotten some encouragement from the Fox News poll yesterday showing Jones up by 10. But when I talked to a Democratic strategist today, he said, no, we don't think that's right. We think it's going to be on track for a very close outcome. And the exit poll number that I've seen so far is preliminary, of course, but if we get to the end of the night and the African-American vote is 30% of the electorate in Alabama, I think that is a good sign that optimism for the Jones campaign could be justified.
Michelle, one of the interesting things we do look at is talking to people about how they feel about the candidate they supported. And we'll put those exits up on the screen, which are just coming in brand new here tonight. When you talk about Democratic Party, Alabama voters there, mostly unfavorable for the Democrats, and they were also mostly unfavorable for the Republicans. There's also, though, a question about what describes your vote when you strongly favor a candidate. You see there, the Republicans also unfavorable. So people don't like either party in Alabama right now. When you talk about Moore, though, he has a lot more people who say, about a third say they like him with reservations, whereas Jones has a much more united, strong front. That would make sense, given the allegations, but it would also suggest that a fair number of Republicans stayed with Moore despite those reservations.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And the polls are showing it. Anecdotal evidence when you talk to voters that support Roy Moore, it's pretty clear. I don't know if you saw, over the weekend, Ari, a segment that Frank Luntz did for Vice, where he interviewed a focus group of Republican voters who support Roy Moore, and it appeared to me, at least, that there is absolutely nothing that Roy Moore could do that a certain portion of the electorate will find so unconscionable that they would either stay home or vote for his opponent. So the big question tonight, again, will be what are women voters going to do, and what are African-American voters going to do?
I have to jump in with some more breaking news. John Harwood, report here on calendaring. The Senate Republicans making it clear tonight, even before the polls close, they will meet, they say, at 10 a.m. tomorrow, ready to discuss, quote, next steps if Roy Moore wins. This is according to multiple sources confirmed by NBC News. Meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Capitol. What, if anything, does that mean?
Well, Republicans are trying to protect themselves from the stink of Roy Moore if he wins the race. They want the vote. They want the seat. President Trump wants the seat for his agenda for the tax bill, among other things, although that may be done before the new senator gets here. But Republicans are trying to do so in a way that prevents other Republicans from suffering the burdens of being associated with Roy Moore. And that's why, remember, a while ago, Mitch McConnell said that he believed the women and he thought Moore should step aside. Moore didn't step aside, so they want him to win, but they still need some protection as they go into 2018.
Yeah, and I'm just reading more from this reporting note we just got in. Again, an unusual night for American politics. Frank Thorpe writing here, McConnell and other Republicans have said Moore would face an almost immediate investigation from the Senate Ethics Committee, as you allege. That's the Capitol Dome. That is the furious negotiations and planning going on tonight. Hard to think of another election, special or otherwise, where on the night of the election before the polls closed, there was talk of how an ethics inquiry would proceed in Washington. Unusual to say the least. And John Harwood, we will be watching the room you're in tonight to see whether it is boisterous or not. John Harwood, Michelle Bernard, thank you both.
My pleasure.
Up next, the turnout question, Alabama, and whether Republicans have tried to suppress the vote by certain people. We are looking right now at more live picks in Alabama. This is the scene as the polls close in an hour and 9 minutes. Now, on election nights, we often focus on who's voting. But Alabama's strict voter ID rules could shape tonight's race based on who didn't vote. Republicans added these photo ID rules in 2011. And while there can be neutral reasons for voter ID, Republicans in Alabama were caught making other arguments, like suppressing the black vote. One legislator saying that black voters were, quote, illiterates and aborigines. Or take Senator Dixon, who voiced a concern that the right to vote without showing ID was allegedly, quote, beneficial to the black power structure. All right. Or take the Alabama Republican in charge of elections, John Merrill. You may remember he told The Beat last month he was supporting Roy Moore but not endorsing Roy Moore.
The evidence that has been introduced, I need to continue to see what's out there. I need to continue to hear information.
But Merrill, who ultimately was a Moore supporter, says people who don't clear the state's hurdles to voting are, quote, lazy.
If you're too sorry or lazy to get up off of your rear and to go register to vote or to register electronically and then to go vote, then you don't deserve that privilege.
Do you have it as a privilege? A lot of people say voting is a right, and Alabama's actually been making it even harder to do, closing 31 offices that provide the IDs you need to vote. Now, will any of this shape tonight's results that are going to pour in now an hour and 6 minutes? Well, in the New York Times, Scott Douglas writes that after Alabama implemented a strict voter ID law, turnout in its most racially diverse counties declined by almost 5 points. And the last time Roy Moore ran for office, he won by 4 points. Joined now by Scott Douglas, Executive Director of Greater Birmingham Ministries, a group suing to block the photo ID law. Sir, thank you for joining me. This is an important part of election nights that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. What do you want people to know?
I just want people to know that voting is a right that was fought for and blood shed for here in Alabama and Selma in 1965 to have America live up to its promise of equality and justice for everyone. It comes as a hard-earned thing, and it's something we won't let slip by just because there's shenanigans of greedy politicians who want power above everything else.
And who, in your view, as you've been writing about this, is affected most when you have these restrictions and combined with the policy choices to close these offices?
Well, I'll start with the second part of the question about policy choices. Those who represent Alabama should represent the voices of all Alabamians. And when a section of Alabamians have their voices muted by the imposition of substantially another form of poll tax, that is a financial burden to secure and obtain the right to vote, then that's absolutely wrong. And so the voices of all Alabamians are not even heard. This particularly true of African Americans and poor whites, for that matter, and poor Latinos, for that matter.
And while I have you here as someone who knows these issues so well, how much of Roy Moore's potential appeal that's being tested here in the next hour do you think relates to his views and policies on civil rights and race?
Oh, my goodness. This a throwback to George Wallace in 1962, not even the George Wallace of 1982 when he apologized. That is, using the race card and fear and racial divisions to separate people, particularly working people, who have common cause for free public education, a better future for their kids, affordable housing, good transportation and public transportation. Those interests we share. But racism and the appeal to racism keeps us divided still.
Scott Douglas, sir, I read with great interest your work on this, and I appreciate you joining our special coverage tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Ari.
And we're going to fit in a break and be right back on this big night. We're looking at live shots of two places in Alabama that will hold likely very different fortunes tonight. The Roy Moore headquarters, the embattled judge there in Montgomery, Alabama. On the right side of your screen, Doug Jones headquarters, where we heard reports tonight about, quote, cautious optimism, but no one knows anything till we get through the next hour and the polls close. There's a very special edition of Hardball up next. That is a show I would not miss on a night like tonight. I'm Ari Melber signing off for The Beat. We'll see you soon. Hardball with Chris Matthews starts now.
Horse race. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews here in Washington. All eyes are on Alabama tonight, however, where polls close in less than an hour at 8 p.m. Eastern. Today, the Republican Senate candidate, Roy Moore, there he is, was a man on horseback riding to his polling station on his horse, Sassy. Deep in the heart of Dixie, voters are deciding between Republican Roy Moore and Democrat Doug Jones. Exit polls show a very close battle between those people who think the charges of past sexual misconduct against Moore are true and those who don't. 49% say the charges are definitely or probably true. 49%. While 45% say the charges are definitely or probably not true. False. Another telling result is on the question of President Trump's job approval. Look at this number. 48 all, even Steven on Trump's job performance. That's a great leading indicator of what's coming tonight. And this comes after Trump began this day, Election Day, by accusing New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of being a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, of begging for campaign contributions from Trump, in fact saying she would do anything for them. That was the phrase Trump used tonight, that she came into his office, met with him, and said she would do anything to get his campaign money. Senator Elizabeth Warren called that a case of slut-shaming. A lot hangs in the balance down in Alabama tonight for the Republican Party. A victory for Jones would weaken Republican control of the Senate, potentially jeopardizing the president's agenda. But a victory for Moore could also leave lasting effects on the party struggling to define itself. Both men made a last-minute appeal to voters today. Let's listen to them.
Here today, this is a very important race for our country, for our state, and for the future.
We feel very good about where we are in this race, what we've done, what we've accomplished. In Alabama, we have come so far with too many things. And there's this saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Alabama's not going to let that shame happen again.
Well, Moore had been missing from the campaign trail for almost a week, made a defiant return last night, rallying supporters and attacking the women who accused him of sexual misconduct. Let's watch.
We've been intimidated. Other people have been intimidated, and we're tired of it. The Washington Post put out this terrible, disgusting article saying I had done something, and I want you to understand something. They said these women, two, had not come forward for nearly 40 years. But they waited to 30 days before this general election to come forward. Actions are going to speak louder than words.
Well, the former judge got some serious reinforcement from his biggest booster, Steve Bannon.
This is greater than Judge Moore, right? It's even greater than the people of Alabama. I know one thing. Nobody can come down here and tell folks in Alabama what to do.
Well, he's doing it. Anyway, his challenger, Doug Jones, held his own rally and made his closing argument to the voters of Alabama.
It is time, and I think we're going to see it tomorrow, that the majority of the people of Alabama say that it is time that we put our decency, our state, before political parties.
Well, Jones brought along some support, and it came from Alabama native. And now, one of my favorites, Charles Barkley, used to play for the Sixers. Here he is.
I am begging and urging everybody to get out, call all your friends. We got to, at some point, we got to stop looking like idiots to the nation.
Love Barkley. Anyway, early this morning, the president weighed in and reminded his supporters just where he stood, tweeting, "The people of Alabama will do the right thing. Jones is a Pelosi-Schumer puppet. Roy Moore will always vote with us. Vote Roy Moore." For the latest, I'm joined by John Archibald. He's a columnist with the Alabama Media Group, and Ani Lindenberg and Matt Murphy, the hosts of Matt and Ani, the most listened to political news radio program down in Alabama. John, thank you first. What do you smell tonight? That's my favorite question politically. What do you smell? What's happening? You know, come on, you know what I mean.
I smell a tight one. I don't know what's going to happen. It's getting intense out there. The exit polling is really interesting. This one's going to go down the wire, and I'll tell you what, I've never seen anything like it in my 30 years of doing this stuff.
Well, let me go to Ani and let me go to Matt. It's nice to meet you folks. People talk you up. Let me ask you this. When you see the exit polls that say Trump 48-48, what's that tell you about tonight? Anything? Ani first.
Could you repeat that, Chris?
When you see an exit poll that shows President Trump's job support in Alabama among those who voted today at 48 all, what does that tell you about who's going to win tonight? Anything?
It tells me this race is, as we say, tight as a tick, Chris.
Well, how tight is a tick? Ha! I don't know what he ticks.
Depends.
How tight are they? You mean when it's bitten into you, you mean? I guess that's what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We kind of went into this thinking there would maybe a 5-point lead. I'd bumped it down to about a 2-point lead, but I don't know. I mean, I just
who you
don't
giving
know
it
what
to right now?
Turnout looks like.
Ani, who
Roy
you
Moore.
giving it to? Roy Moore. What do you say, Matt?
Moore.
Same question.
It's a lot tighter than I expected even a week ago, Chris. I would expect that Roy Moore squeezes this one out. It's a lot tighter than anyone would have expected. Considering some of the exit polling we're getting with African-American turnout being a little bit higher than we anticipated, it is anybody's ballgame. It's a jump ball right now.
How high is it? Is it up to 25%? Where would you vote? Let me go back to John on this. John, the black vote, is the black vote going to be 25%, which apparently is the threshold to win this thing for Jones?
It looks like it right now. It
30%.
looks to me like the turnout is going to be a little bit higher than Secretary of State John Merrill initially predicted, which was 20 to 25. And we're hearing pretty high turnout in African-American communities, pretty high turnout all over. High being relative, of course. If you consider 30% high, it's high. So, I mean, I think there's that window where Doug Jones has the only chance that he has.
Wow. Well, let me ask you about this.
Back to the days, Chris. It harkened back to the days of, you know, oh, well, I have a really good friend who's a black person. It just came off very awkwardly. I would say that I find it intriguing that everybody has a special place in hell nowadays.
That's the thing.
Steve Bannon thinks you have a special place in hell if you vote for the if you don't vote for the GOP. Everybody that votes differently than you seems to have a special place in hell in this election.
It took the place of everyone as Hitler you know, in the
I think
presidential
you're great.
race.
You guys are good. Let me just give you a minute or two now. What is it about Alabama? Just tell me give me the picture of the culture of Alabama. You first, Arnie. Just how do you feel if you were going to somewhere overseas somewhere? And you said, let me tell you about Alabama. What would you tell them?
Let me tell you something about Alabama.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm listening. All ears.
Listen, the rest of the nation thinks we are a redneck, backwards country. We did get plumbing. That's something new for us here. But we have an auto industry that is thriving. We have a food industry that's thriving. We are educated. We are thoughtful. This is a complicated election. It's not as simple as you're going to vote for the child molester or you're going to vote for the abortionist. It is not that simple. We have been dealing with hell in the political realm in this state since our governor was kicked out for shenanigans in the office with one of his assistants. So this has been the longest, craziest political year, but don't judge us by some of these politicians' actions because we are not to be, thought less of. You know, it's not all what you people think out there.
You people, I accept that. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I mean, we're not.
I just love that attitude.
I don't think we're nearly as monolithic as the rest of the country might have you believe. Yeah. Roy Moore has been a known quantity for 20 years, and he's been a controversial figure for 20 years. He was almost the candidate by default. If Luther Strange had made an attempt to be what he had always been during the course of the election, he would be the candidate in this race right now, and I think he'd beat Doug Jones by 15 points. But unfortunately, he didn't do that. But I would tell you that Alabama, since I've been here, I got here in 1999. It is a thoughtful, considerate place when it comes to politics, and despite our conservatism and how that might be perceived around the nation, we do put a lot of thought into the candidate that we vote for come Election Day.
Well, you know, I did go to Chapel Hill. I'm not completely alien to the South, but thank you. You guys are a piece of work. You're great. Anyway, John Archibald, make your call. Who's going to win tonight?
I still think that it's leaning toward Roy Moore, but you know, anything can happen. It really is. I hate to say it, but it is a coin flip.
Thank you so much. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we smell a tie. Anyway, thank you, John Archibald. Arnie Lindenberg and Matt Murphy, you two are something special. And we're going to get a look, by the way, more at the exit polls in the Alabama in just a minute. We're going to have more of what we were learning already before the polls close. And we'll be back at midnight tonight with all the results from the Alabama Senate race. I'm going to call the show tonight, late night, Midnight Cowboy, because of that candidate, Roy Moore. Also coming up tonight, Donald Trump is lashing out at 3 women who revived their accusations of sexual misconduct against him, the president, and now he's making a sexual insinuation about a sitting senator who called on him to resign or face a congressional investigation. That's ahead. He's getting pretty nasty. Plus, the Russia investigation, as Robert Mueller moves in, conservatives want him stopped. Trump's attorney now wants a special prosecutor to investigate the special prosecutor. You know what that's about? Deflection. And the Hardball Roundtable is here as Alabama voters go to the polls. Actually, they're pretty much going to the polls. Will they reject Roy Moore by 8 o'clock? We'll see when voting ends tonight at the end of the hour. Just 45 minutes from now, we may have a good count till midnight. Finally, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. We'll see how he likes this baby. This is Hardball with the Actionists. Well, as I said, we're going to have more on the race in Alabama throughout this hour as we await poll closing at 8 Eastern time. It's coming up fast now, about 42 minutes from now. And don't forget our special edition of Hardball at midnight. We're calling it Midnight Cowboy because guess what? Win or lose, it's about Roy Moore. Up next, President Trump attacks Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, lashing out in a tweet that you have to view as sexually degrading. It clearly was. This is Democrats are calling on the president to be investigated for his misconduct or resign. I don't think he's going to do that. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. Donald Trump is lashing out today against a leading voice in the U.S. Senate against sexual misconduct, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. In a tweet early this morning that many have interpreted as sexually suggestive, I'd say so, Trump said the senator said she would do anything for him if he'd give her some campaign money. The way he's set up, you watch this. Trump wrote, lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not long ago and would do anything for them, is now in the ring fighting against Trump. Very disloyal to Bill and crooked. Used. That was his phrase. The president's tweet sparked a fierce backlash. Let's watch.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice. And I will not be silenced on this issue. Neither will the women who stood up to the president yesterday.
When the president tweeted
about our colleague, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, is grotesque. It took my breath away, and it represents the conduct of a person who is ill-equipped to be the President of the United States.
The President's tweet this morning against Senator Gillibrand was a disgraceful sexist slur that has no place in American dialogue and diminishes and shames the office of President.
Well, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who will say anything in the president's defense, was asked about the president's tweet. Here's what she said.
Gillibrand owed an apology for the misunderstanding of the president's tweet this morning because many, including the senator, thinks that it's about sexual innuendos.
I think only if your mind is in the gutter would you have read it that way. And so, no.
Well, she seemed to be responding. Let's say Trump appears to be responding to Senator Gillibrand's call yesterday for Congress to investigate allegations against him of sexual misconduct. Well, more than 50 Democratic Congresswomen have echoed Gillibrand's appeal, asking for an investigation, a probe by the House Oversight Committee, which apparently has wide-ranging authority to hold such investigations. Senator Gillibrand, by the way, is also one of 6 Democratic senators who have called for the president to quit. There they are. For more, I'm joined by U.S. Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence from Michigan, one of the Democrats calling for an investigation into the president. Stephanie Shryock, who's been here forever. She's with Emily's List, not forever, half as long as I've been here. And the Washington Post, Robert Costa. Congresswoman, I don't think it takes a lot of interpretation when a president comes on and tweets at dawn today that she came into his office apparently all alone and says, I'll do anything for money. I mean, it was pretty clear. It was slut-shaming, to use the phrase of Elizabeth Warren.
This is a continuance of behavior, of wording, of just his view of women. It is so comfortable for him to give these type of comments. And for him, he's been Teflon and nothing has stuck. But we are
But it has stuck, Congressman. We all know this. We all know all this stuff about him, and he never actually denies it, really.
We have
gets away with it.
We have called for an investigation, saying that this president, if we're holding other members of Congress accountable, it doesn't stop in the House. It should go to the White House. He has admitted that he said those things in the recording. Then he goes back and said, well, it was just shop talk. It was just locker room talk. And now here we have it again. Look at how he treated other anchor women, and it's continuous. This is a president that has no respect for women. And even in this Moore situation, he takes a national platform to say, these women, they're just allegations. Don't pay them any attention. Men can do what they want to do, and there's no accountability. He should be investigated just like everyone else with allegations of sexual harassment.
Let me go to Robert for a minute before we get to Stephanie. Robert, why do you think he did this morning? Because he really upped. You're not supposed to shoot down. He's president of the United States. He's going after the junior senator from New York, who's not known by 90% of the people in the country. She's very smart and may well be president someday, but right now she's not known. He's building her up to like a duel. He's like, it's me against Kirsten Gillibrand. People out in Wyoming are saying, who's this he's fighting with today? Why is he building her up by accusing her of this?
You hinted at it in your question, Chris. He sees in Senator Gillibrand and Senator Elizabeth Warren potential 2020 rivals, and he wants to define them on his own rough terms at this early stage.
Wow, what do you make of that, Stephanie? You're a smart Paul. Why do you think it's smart of him to build them up? Because he thinks he can beat them, obviously?
No. I mean, no, but I don't think most of the things he does is very smart. So to be fair to that, like, he's not. I think it is how he is doing that is so disgusting. And I was outraged this morning.
Did you hear it the way most people heard it?
Yes.
It was basically accusing him of saying, here I am for you, buddy.
And I say to the press secretary as well, I mean, Sarah.
Why did she say
heard
you're
it
in the
that
gutter?
way
Your mind's,
too.
why did she say to April Ryan, your mind's in the gutter?
Because she has to defend. But we all know what he said because he's a bully, and he's really good at using this coded language. And as he goes after Senator Gillibrand, goes after Senator Warren, we see it over and over again. He's using this gendered coded language. He also does it on the racial front as well, and that's really what this was.
Congressman, let's talk about this. He did the same thing against the opponent, the woman opponent. Remember he made fun of her looks?
Yes.
And then the woman said brilliantly, the smartest thing she said in the campaign, every every woman in America knew what you meant. Well, this time I think every man and woman in America knows what he meant.
Yeah.
And now, why does he say it, then deny it, or have his flag come out and deny it? He clearly intends to reduce her sexually. That's what he did.
This man is a predator. He has demonstrated time and time again that he views women at a level that is unacceptable for anyone, but for him to be the president of the United States, just think about the young girls who are watching this. The girls who are growing up and seeing the president of the United States said, oh, you were in the office and you'll do anything to get money from me. The shock is, oh my goodness, what is he saying? And this is, we need to call for accountability. Accountability for this man who was elected to be president, who is taking his platform to attack women.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Can I add one thing, though, because she's not taking credit for something great that happened today. The difference about this moment right now is that we have these incredible women in Congress, like Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence and Senator Gillibrand, who are willing to stand up to hear the women's voices that are being called. And I think about the Me Too movement that we are in the middle of, and to know that the women in Congress are there to say, we are going to hear you, we're going to listen. This is, I'm telling you, and you know me, I work to elect Democratic women at Emily's List.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Democrats.
Across the board, we need more of them.
For years.
Okay.
I know the tools the opposition has.
Yes.
You guys have, you Democrats, I'll now talk at Democrats, although I tend to vote that way most of, not all the time.
Okay.
I'm looking at you and I'm saying, why don't you guys do? You could get special orders. You could start the minute the session's over tonight or tomorrow night, go into the well of the House, and all night long on C-SPAN, you could rail against this president and the accusations against him. You could quote chapter and verse all the charges against. You own that facility, and yet the Democrats don't use the tools of public communication the way the Republicans know how to do it. Why don't you do it?
I would have to push back from you. We have never had a president that every single day.
Why don't you do what I'm saying?
Every single day we are attacking those issues because every single day there's something we are doing.
When?
We are on the floor every night. The tax plan. We have to fight for taxes. We have to fight for DACA. We have to fight for.
Are you on this all night?
Am I in this all night?
Are the Democrats using the floor of the House?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
On this issue?
On this issue, we had a press conference today. We had over 100 women.
We're arguing against each
100 women signed on to ask for an investigation.
I hate to give advice because it's never really taken.
And Gowie said it was criminal and that we should refer to the
You've got the floor of the House. You should use it anyway. Last thought from you. Robert, I love to argue. Robert, give me a sense. Is President Trump happy with the way this thing's turned out today, that it's become a battle between him and Kirsten Gillibrand?
He always likes to be at the center of things, but he now faces the point that if Doug Jones wins tonight in Alabama, or he comes close to winning, it's going to show that even in red states, questions of character and conduct matter, even to Trump voters, Trump's core base. That could have reverberations in the 2018 midterms because the allegations against President Trump have been revived and will continue to be revived.
Well said. Thank you much. By the way, as Congresswoman, they're called special orders. I'm pushing for them. Anyway, use them, exploit them. They're your tools to use. Don't call me sir. Just listen to the occasional experience of history. I'm so much older than you. Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman, for coming on.
Much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, Stephanie Shryock, of course, always with Emily's List, and Robert Costa of the Washington Post. Up next, as Special Counsel Mueller's investigation closes in on Trump's inner circle, conservatives are pushing back. The president's lawyers now want a second special counsel appointed to distract, of course. And later, back to the Alabama Senate race. Polls will be closed in half an hour now. I'm looking there less than half an hour. This is Hardball, where the action is. Welcome back to Hardball. Trump's defenders and his lawyers are trying to deflect attention from the ongoing Russian probe and are instead calling again for investigations of the FBI and of Hillary Clinton again. And now Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow is getting into the game after Fox News reported that a Justice Department official was demoted for having connections to, including his wife having worked for, the research firm that hired the former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele to compile the dossier on Donald Trump. Fox reported last week that the House Intelligence Committee, led by Devin Nunes, has evidence that the demoted Justice Department official met with Steele during the election last year and later met with the founder of the company that hired him to produce the dossier. Then Fox further reported yesterday that the wife of the demoted official worked for the opposition research firm last year. And now Trump attorney Jay Sekulow tells Axios that, quote, the Department of Justice and FBI cannot ignore the multiple problems that have been created by these obvious conflicts of interest. These new revelations require the appointment of a special counsel to investigate. He later added, it has nothing to do with Bob Mueller or Mueller's team. I'm joined now by Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC's legal analyst. Well, let's start with that admission by Sekulow, the lawyer for the president. He's saying it has nothing to do with Bob Mueller's investigation. So why are they having a special investigation about an internal matter within the Justice Department about whether there was a conflict between a guy having something to do with picking this research firm and his wife working for that research firm and that research firm having worked for Hillary? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything corrupt here. And by the way, can't the Department of Justice figure this out?
Special counsel for what? So when I'm coming on Hardball, I do my homework. I looked up the special counsel statute. It says if there's a conflict of interest that the department can't prosecute the case objectively, like, for example, when the attorney general does not tell the truth about his own dealings with the Russians and he's supposed to be investigating the Russians. That's a conflict. It's not a conflict when there's no allegations that anyone's done anything wrong. So Orr, who's the subject of this new call, all he has is a wife who has a job. You're allowed to have a partner who works outside of the Department of Justice. He hasn't done anything wrong. Again, we do need to know about his conversations with Steele, with the people who collected this dossier, whether that had anything to do with how the department ruled. But again, there's no allegations at this point of any impropriety. It's a false equivalence. The president's lawyers are saying because there's a special counsel who's investigating Trump, there ought to be a special counsel to investigate Hillary. That's not how it works.
So why do you think they're doing it? Just to, what for? To just create trouble?
Well, again, I don't blame the president's defense attorney because finally the president has a lawyer who understands that this lawyer's responsibility is to President Trump, to keeping Donald Trump out of prison or in office, as opposed to his loyalty being to the United States, which is the loyalty of the Attorney General. Who I do blame is the people who are on the Senate Intelligence Committees, the Republicans who are also calling for a special counsel, because their duty is to the United States. And this investigation, for which there is a special counsel, Russian collusion, that's about the integrity of American democracy. It's more consequential than Watergate. And so for them to play politics about this and say, oh, we need another special counsel, that's unconscionable.
And it's what they do. Anyway, they did it before during the Iraq War cover-up. Remember, they went after a U.S. ambassador that went over and reported back from Africa because his wife worked for the CIA. They outed her just to show something that didn't prove anything except that they were scurrilous. Anyway, thank you, Paul Butler. Alabama, by the way, the polls close down there in just 20 minutes. Will Republicans break with their candidate Roy Moore or not? It looks really close based upon all the numbers we looked at. And will Democrats see heavy turnout at the polls, especially among African Americans and women voters? We've got more from our exit polling coming up next, by the way, right now. You're watching Hardball.
Typically is, but you still need Republican women to cross over.
And that's 25% of the electorate tonight will be African American. That's
if more than 25% of the electorate tonight is African American, which right now the early exits show it more, then that's a really good sign for Democrats. Also, one quick thing. That only 49%, that 49% plurality think that the allegations is true, also is a bad indicator for Roy Moore.
Bad indicator.
Yes.
Well, if the turnout models are that if overall numbers get up to not just midterm levels, but kind of presidential levels of voting, that Doug Jones actually could have a chance at this. But I agree 100% with Cornell. Sorry, Sophia. This does come down to those Republican women and the conversation that they have with themselves once they get inside that voting booth. Because look, we should all be thinking, having flashbacks here to the actual presidential election itself, when all of the polls suggested that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag, but there was this segment of voters to this day that we think weren't straight with the pollsters about what they were going to do when they pulled the ballots.
Why weren't they straight?
50% of white women. That's what I'm trying to say. It's white. It's the white women, stupid. Believe me or not.
Well, why are they saying one thing to pollsters?
Because it's not politically correct. They didn't want to say they were going to vote against Hillary Clinton, but 53% of white women put Donald Trump in the White House.
Okay, let me ask you guys the big question. There's been a lot of national attention on this race across the country, everywhere. The whole world's watching this. Anybody's following the news around the world is watching this. Has that been a plus or negative for Roy Moore? I think it's probably encouraged the turnout. but it's also created this sort of Alabama against the world mentality.
I agree. I
think.
totally
Tell
agree
me
with
who
you.
What's the net effect of all this publicity?
Cornell's right. If there's a 30% black turnout, I think Doug Jones has a shot. I think if it's below that, like I said, white evangelicals and white women are going to carry him into this seat.
I think, real quickly, I think the world is watching this is bad for Mitch McConnell, right? Either way.
No, but go back to this question. You're the pollster here. Is it driving up the attitude of Alabama outside agitators, which we grew up with that phrase?
Tell you, I had a conversation with Senator Kennedy, who's in neighboring Louisiana, but very similar culturally today. We cannot underestimate the seething anger of people in that region about Washington, not just Washington, but the rest of the world coming down there. People like Charles Barkley saying, show them you all are not rednecks.
Well, that's what Ani, you heard Ani a minute ago, Lindbergh. She was saying we're not all the way you people think we are. It threw me in that barrel.
But the flip side of that is, of course, is the business communities who's saying, you know what, we don't want to look to a state that's trying to be a tech and manufacturing hub, who wants to bring in all these new companies. Yeah. We don't want to look backwards in the view of the world.
I think there's a great conflicting strains. Anyway, the roundtable's sticking with us. Enough next week. We're going to get some scoops for these people for tomorrow. By the way, they can predict who's going to win if they want to before 8 o'clock. You're watching Hardball. Well, the polls are going to be closed in Alabama at the top of the hour, which we're getting to right now, and we're going to get our first characterization of the race. Don't you like that? Too close, too late, or whatever. Anyway, right now, we're back with the Hardball Roundtable. Sophia, tell me something I don't know.
Well, first, I think Roy Moore will win by 3 points, and then I think what you don't know is that
testable prediction.
That 3 Washington Post reporters were turned away from the Moore headquarters event tonight, the election campaign event.
Turned away?
Yeah, they wouldn't let them in, so they don't like the Washington Post on it.
I've actually changed my tell you something. Mine is I actually think that Doug Jones is going to win. When I look at that 49%, I think Doug Jones wins by a percentage point. And I think no one's rooting more for Doug Jones than Mitch McConnell. That's something you don't know.
That's well said. Thank you.
I'm not making a prediction.
You don't have to.
I'm just going to tell you. I'm going to report here that I've been in touch with Mitch McConnell's aides this evening, and if Moore wins, as we're expecting, potentially, he will try and kick this over to the conference as a decision about what they're going to do with the committee posts, about what they're going to do with an ethics investigation. Stress that many of these things are very complicated processes, and it's up to the conference.
Well, fascinating. Great forward-looking reporting there. Sophia Nelson, thank you as always. Cornell Belcher, it's a great group. And Heidi, of course, Heidi Prespley. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. You're watching Hardball. Trump Watch, Tuesday, December 12th, 2017. We're on the verge of getting Alabama's verdict. Polls will be closed in just a minute. Much of the news-connected world is looking to see the latest take on what America stands for. Are we a country that upholds traditional values, even if it means abiding their violation? That will certainly be the message if Roy Moore comes out the victor, because the voters of Alabama will be saying just that they want a senator in Washington who shares their values on abortion and marriage. That would be Republican Roy Moore, and don't want one that does not. That being Democrat Doug Jones. The difficulty of predicting this election lies in the unwillingness of people to speak honestly to pollsters. It's an old belief of mine. If you get a phone call from someone with a well-educated voice, it conveys a certain political attitude. Should you hold hard-right political views, you may not be so interested in sharing that fact with someone with a voice like that of the pollster who's got you on the phone. So based on all this, I think it's going to be close tonight. But no matter how close, the verdict from Alabama is going to be heard worldwide. It's going to be a signal from this country about who we are, what we value, and what behavior we will abide. And that's Hardball for now. Thanks for being with us. The polls in Alabama are about to close. And just a reminder, I'll be back at midnight tonight with Midnight Cowboy, the story of Roy Moore and how he did today. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
I don't think that Roy Moore is going to win this election.
If you don't believe in my character, don't vote for me.
Tonight, the massive stakes of the special election in Alabama.
We got to stop looking like idiots to the nation.
Would a Roy Moore win be an even bigger headache for Republicans? Can the Democrat Doug Jones shock the world?
Get out and vote for Roy Moore.
And the president pours gasoline on his own Me Too moment.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice.
The first results from election night in Alabama, when All In starts right now.
One of our attorneys is a Jew.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and it is a very big night. The polls have just at this moment closed in the special Senate election in Alabama. At this hour, NBC News characterizing the race there as too early to call. And with polls closed, we can now begin to monitor the actual returns. We don't really have any of those yet because they have literally closed just 41 seconds ago. But there's a lot to keep an eye on as the returns come in. And we begin tonight with our first fresh exclusive look at the actual exit polls for the day. Joining me to break down the latest batch of exit poll data hot off the presses, of course, MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, we got around as this happens at 5, I believe, right? Now this is the 8 p.m., so this is for the full day. What can you tell us?
Yeah, just in the last 5 minutes here. And look, basically the headline from this, we'll load it up here, see what we have. There's something in here that each campaign's going to like. Let me take you through what we have. First of all, this question here of composition of the electorate. What did it look like today? The headline from these numbers is this. 30% of the electorate right now in the exit poll is black. Now, we talked in the run-up to this race about how important to Democrats black turnout was, and we kept saying, can they get it close to the level that Obama got it at when he ran the last time in 2012? Well, guess what? When Obama ran the last time in 2012, black vote made up 28% of the electorate. That was supposed to be the high watermark for Democrats. Good news for them tonight was supposed to be 26, 27. Right now, we're looking at an exit poll that says 30% of this electorate is black tonight. So that is extremely good news for Democrats. But I said there's something in here for both parties. I want to go through and see what else. Look at the breakdown now when you look at the white vote versus the black vote. You've got, this is Obama level again. Obama got 95% of the black vote in 2012. That is what Jones is getting. But Jones, we kept saying this as well, Jones needs to pick up some of the white voters in the state who normally vote Republican. In 2012, Obama got 15%. He got blown out in the state. I think a threshold tonight was 30, maybe 35, depending on where black turnout was. This is probably a touch lower than the Jones campaign wants to be seeing among white voters, 27%. When you break it down to, he's losing double digits with college-educated white voters. That's the group he thought he could make inroads with. So Jones' campaign may be a little short in this exit poll. They wanted to be with white voters, but they also are doing a little better with black voters than they thought. So, Chrissy, as I said, there is something here for each campaign right now.
You know, we don't, obviously, we don't have any returns yet. And one of the things that's happened in the run-up to this election is it's almost created a new kind of way of pollsters communicating because it is such a black box to everyone how the heck to model what this electorate looks like. Those two data points would seem to be in line with a kind of pollster average and pollster predictions of a close race, wherever that closeness ends up.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, again, if you looked at this right now, if you took each one of these in isolation, you'd be saying, if we just looked at the white vote in this race, we'd be saying, okay, you know what, this was a good night for Roy Moore right here. But if you said to anybody coming into today that 30% of the electorate was going to be black tonight, say, oh my God, that's beyond best case scenario for Democrats. So I think, yes, this is looking close right now. It's a cliche. We'll see what happens when the returns come in. But you talk about those models beforehand. Nobody was talking about 30% black vote.
Give us a little context here. I mean, it's funny because you talk about 2012, the last time Barack Obama was on the ballot, you get a fairly high black turnout for the state of Alabama. Of course, Obama loses by, I think, 23 points or something in the neighborhood of 23 points back in 2012. I mean, it has been a very long time since there was a very competitive statewide federal race in the state of Alabama.
Yeah, you got to go back. 1996, that was the year that Jeff Sessions won his Senate seat the first time. The margin was 7 points in Alabama. That's the last time you had a single-digit Senate race in Alabama. Last time you got within a couple points, it was really within 1 point, was 1986. So Richard Shelby, the current senior Republican senator, he won his seat in 86 by a fraction of a point. Otherwise, I mean, you look at races here where 30, 40 points, even Sessions was essentially unopposed one year. That's been the norm.
One more question, and we should note that those races are really happening before the partisan sorting out is happening in the South like we've seen it. It's sort of, obviously, the sort of post-Civil War regime crumbles in the 80s and 90s, and now you've got a sort of solid block of Republican voters. The final question here, you've been making this point, and I think it's an interesting one, as we start to look at more exit polling data, which we will get, things about abortion, things about what party you support, who you want to be running the U.S. Senate. You made this point, and I think it's a very astute one, that if this were a statewide Supreme Court race, you think Moore would basically be toast. That the thing that has kept him going is that voters, particularly diehard, bleed red Republican voters, are thinking, I may not like Roy Moore, but what is at stake is control of the United States Senate federally.
Yeah, and take a look. I think we can actually call this up for you right here. This was Roy Moore's last election in Alabama. Why I said I think he'd lose if it was Chief Justice. 5 years ago, he's on the ballot. Mitt Romney's winning this state on this same day with 62% of the vote. You see, look, Roy Moore barely wins this election. So Roy Moore, before any of the baggage we've talked about for the last few weeks, he had enough baggage to nearly lose a statewide race where there's no issues of who are you going to send to appoint a Supreme Court justice to decide Roe versus Wade, any of those issues.
Right.
It's not attached to any of that. So Moore as a person was a huge liability for the Republicans in 2012 before all of this. So again, and we have it in an exit poll finding night. You ask people which party you want controlling the Senate. They say Republican. So Moore is hoping people vote for the party, not the person.
One more follow-up on that, because I think it's worth noting as well when we talk about Roy Moore, and part of what makes this race so hard to poll, so hard to model, so hard to figure out, is Roy Moore is a real singular figure. He wins that race. He goes back to the state Supreme Court. He's already been removed once for disobeying federal law, right? He will then end up removed again, right? So even when he jumps into this primary, and before the Washington Post story in which a 14-year-old says that he picked her up outside a custody hearing and molested her, right? Before that, after that election, which he ekes out by 4 points, he then gets removed again from the state Supreme Court in Alabama.
And that was over the issue of gay marriage. It was the 10 Commandments a decade ago. Then it was gay marriage. Look, Roy Moore is a figure now basically 2 decades in Alabama. This is a very well-known guy. This is an intensely polarizing figure in Alabama. Then you throw all of this. It's the ultimate test between person and party.
One more point I would make on this, though, also, is that Doug Jones was, from the beginning, a credible candidate, whether people are going to vote for him or not. This was not someone who they found at the last second and wrote his name in. This was someone who had a bit of a profile, had a resume, had a story to tell, and has run, I think, as a campaign, a very respectable campaign.
And I think the one question, if he comes up short tonight, who knows, but if he comes up short tonight, I think the one thing people will look at, not so much a question of strategy, but just sort of a what if with him, is that question of abortion.
Yep.
Because it's in the exit poll tonight. 54% of Alabamans say they believe abortion should be illegal. He took a pro-choice position in this race. That's something the more people were talking about. That's something they wanted to bring up. Can you win with the pro-choice label in one of the most anti-abortion states in the country?
And you couldn't get 7 seconds into a conversation with any more surrogate anywhere in the state of Alabama without abortion coming up. They clearly thought that and control of the Senate were basically
That's what they have.
That
exactly.
was their ace in the hole. Right. Steve Kornacki, that was great. We're going to come check back with you throughout the night. All right, let's go to Montgomery, Alabama, the Roy Moore election night headquarters. We've got NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard standing by for us. And Vaughn, I want to say you have been doing phenomenal reporting on this race from Alabama throughout. I've been following everything you've been posting. You've done some great interviews. You've been talking to lots of voters. How would you characterize how folks have been talking about this race in this last final stretch?
I appreciate that, Chris. And I should note that when we're looking at and talking to these voters here, there's 2 types of voters. There's hesitant voters that are hesitant about voting for Roy Moore, understanding the allegations are against him. But there's also hesitant voters who are not so open about their willingness to vote for Democrat Doug Jones. Today, going around the polling place here in Montgomery, there were several people, right? They tell you, I don't want to tell you who I voted for. And finally, I was able to convince them to tell me off the side without their name, not on camera. And there were Republicans who were opening up and saying, we voted for Doug Jones, many of them saying for the first time in their lives. I talked with the school teacher, Amanda Adams, who said she hasn't voted for a Democrat in 20 years, but it got to the point, she said that she was willing to make that sacrifice, despite knowing what it may mean to the U.S. Senate, and vote for Doug Jones, a Democrat, in this race. I want to bring up, Chris, what is, I think, interesting. I just finished talking with a campaign official here at Roy Moore headquarters watch party, and usually at this point, you know, we're just 5 minutes after the polls closing, usually the campaigns have a little bit better sense of tracking of where this race is. Yesterday, a campaign official for Moore told me they were very confident. They put themselves up 8.5%, suggesting that they had Republicans baked in this state, just in the rural counties alone, that they were going to be able to win this, while maintaining some support in more of the traditionally conservative places like Baldwin and Shelby County. But the official just now, I said, where do you guys feel that you're at? And just said, well, we're seeing high voter turnout everywhere. Couldn't offer too much more in the form of specifics. I talked with the Doug Jones campaign official here this afternoon. They also said, we're seeing high voter turnout. It's very much up in the air what that means. And we're looking, you just went through all those exit polls there with Steve. And it's tough. You know, we've been here now for more than a month. And to try to track down particularly where those Republican crossover voters is very difficult, because they I think they were questioning up to this very end. And the one last number I want to throw from those exit polls there is, though, that 31% of Roy Moore voters here today said that they voted for him despite hesitancy, which was in stark contrast to those about 80% that said for Doug Jones that they voted for him with full confidence without hesitancy. So it's a question of how many Republicans voted him knowing that.
Well, a great point by Vaughn there about shy voters, essentially in both camps, not wanting to publicize their vote for different kind of sets of reasons. And Vaughn, that point you made about crossover Republicans, I mean, between high turnout among young voters and African American voters, some segment of crossover voters is necessary to win in a state that Donald Trump won by nearly 30 points. Vaughn Hillier's at the Moore campaign headquarters in Montgomery, and he will be there all night. So we will come back to you. Let's go down to Birmingham, Alabama, to the Doug Jones election night party. And that's NBC News correspondent Katie Beck. And Katie, what's happening there?
Well, good evening. People have just started to stream in here in Birmingham. We spent today at a diner, also speaking to voters, also encountering a lot of that consternation that Vaughn was just talking about. Voters who are saying, I have voted Republican my entire life, and I am finally now at a crossroads where I simply don't know who to vote for. A lot of the folks we spoke to said they were actually going to write in candidates. We heard from one gentleman who said he was writing in Nick Saban instead of voting for Roy Moore. He said he was a longtime Alabama fan. He simply didn't know what to do, and he had a crisis when he headed into the polls, and that's how he came out. But these voters, obviously, this is something they've been wrestling with. They've been seeing the national attention, and they expressed to me how hard this has been on Alabama as a state. A lot of them feel like they've been misportrayed in the media. They feel like they've been center stage for something they don't want to be center stage for. So they're kind of sighing relief tonight that this is going to be over, and they're finally going to have some answer to this question that's been plaguing them over the past few months.
Although it should be noted that if Roy Moore is a United States Senator, the national coverage and national spotlight on him individually in the state of Alabama will probably continue. Katie Beck, thank you for that update. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
With me now, Democratic National Committee Tom Perez, who was in Alabama this weekend working to get out the vote for Doug Jones. And Tom, there was some back and forth about whether the DNC was going to commit to this race. Am I right that you were there this weekend?
No, I actually wasn't there. We had our team there, Chris. We've had a team there throughout, frankly, from before the Republican primary, because we've been all in for a long time, because Doug Jones is a spectacular candidate. And this case wasn't about, right versus left. It's about right versus wrong. And Doug stands for everything that we should be fighting for.
Well, here's the problem that it strikes me, if you're running the DNC, as you are, right? I mean, the Democratic brand is not great in Alabama. That's not to knock on the Democratic Party. It just is the fact of the matter of how races go in that state. What do you do when the Democratic Party brand is not great, but there's a huge amount of grassroots energy, a huge amount of grassroots fundraising? You obviously want Doug Jones to win a race that, as of the last 6 weeks, looks possible. What do you do to help him win without tying him to the national party in a way that hurts him?
Well, I stay in Washington, D.C., for one thing, Chris.
So that's why you didn't go down there.
And you know what? There's so much we can do to help candidates, and that's what we did for Doug. Doug has a 67-county strategy, because not only does he have to win in Birmingham and Huntsville and Mobile and Montgomery and the Black Belt, but he has to hold his own in other counties. He can't get shellacked like prior Democratic candidates have gotten. And so we invested in organizing. We invested in digital work. We were out there running, helping to run programs that turn out voters, knocking on doors, calling people, texting people. That's what campaigns are about. That's what the new Democratic Party is about. Organizing everywhere and helping Democrats win.
And I understand that you're responsible for organizing and not messaging, but let me ask you this. I mean, given that it's a conservative state and people have the politics they have, and Doug Jones is a Democrat, what do you talk about to Republican voters in those sorts of places where you can't get crushed, as you say, that is both true to the core values of the Democratic Party and is also, you're going to find some sort of receptive audience among folks that have been voting Republican in Alabama?
Well, you talk about the issues they care about. Doug Jones is all about #kitchen table. He was talking about good jobs. He's talking about the fact that, his dad was a steel worker and he understands blue-collar work. He's talking about the fact that if Obamacare gets repealed, I'm sure he doesn't call it Obamacare, but if it gets repealed, that the access to that rural clinic is at issue and at risk. And, as you know, because we talked a lot in Virginia, the #1 issue for voters in Virginia was health care, and they went overwhelmingly for the Democrats. So the beauty of this situation is the message of economic opportunity is a message, I think, that resonates everywhere. And the voters of Alabama, and I have spent a lot of time out there because, I've done civil rights work down in Alabama. That's how I met Doug. I've known him for almost 20 years. And the voters of Alabama don't want someone in Washington who's fighting culture wars. That's what Roy Moore wants to do. They want someone who's fighting for good jobs, for fair wages, for access to health care.
Let me ask you about that. I mean, because, one of the things a lot of people have pointed to in reporting on this race down there, and we looked at the crosstabs about abortion. I mean, this is a very, very anti-abortion state. That is the way, that's the place the electorate is. It's a very anti-abortion state among black voters as well, although there's a majority that support it. It's a higher number that are opposed to abortion in that state than other places in other states. I mean, is there a problem for Doug Jones in taking essentially the National Democratic Party's line on this issue in Alabama?
Well, listen, and as Vaughn's reporting a few minutes ago highlighted, for a lot of voters in Alabama, this came down to not an issue of right versus left, but right versus wrong. The Family Values Party can't possibly be the party of Roy Moore. This is more than about party, and I admire the Republicans and the Democrats and independents in Alabama that have understood that there are times when you go to the voting booth that it's about more than one issue. It's about your identity as a state and as a nation. And as Doug correctly said, folks involved in abusing children should be prosecuted, not put in the U.S. Senate. And I think a lot of folks understood that. And I've talked to a lot of business people in Alabama over the course of the work I have done. And they're for Doug Jones because they know he's going to fight for a good business climate in Alabama. How do you go recruit businesses to come into Alabama when your #1 surrogate is Roy Moore? How do you make that sell to that company?
That was a theme
hard to do.
A theme that Doug Jones was hitting, particularly down the stretch of his campaign. Tom Perez, thanks for making time for me this evening.
Pleasure to be with you.
All right, well, much more on the high-stakes Senate race in Alabama, how it got to this point, the reverberations on Capitol Hill at the mere idea Roy Moore could be elected, and the lose-lose situation the Republican Party as a whole finds itself in at this hour. Our coverage continues after this 2-minute break.
I generally consider myself to be a Republican, but today I voted Democrat. I voted for Doug Jones.
Why?
I do believe that Roy Moore is a sexual predator. He's been removed from office twice. So, in my opinion, he thinks he's above the law.
I voted for Roy Moore, and I believe, a man, until he's actually convicted of something, you can't go by hearsay or what other parties are trying to say he has done.
The Alabama Senate race is one of the strangest elections in years, if not decades. Republican Roy Moore was already disliked by a wide swath of his party because of his homophobia, his religious bigotry, and his in-your-face lawlessness that got him removed from the Supreme Court twice. And then came the sexual misconduct accusations. The Washington Post reporting an allegation that Roy Moore had molested a 14-year-old girl. Allegations of sexual assault and pursuing other teens followed, bringing us to tonight, a deep, deep conservative bone red state where a Democrat has a chance to win a Senate seat. Josh Moon is a reporter and columnist for the Alabama Political Reporter. He joins me live from Montgomery. Josh, let's start on the dynamics of the last 6 weeks in the wake of the Washington Post revelations and how that shaped the terrain of this race.
You know, it's funny to me that it seems like we had this whole setup here with kind of the cult of Roy Moore. You know, and these people who have been around for a long time in this state, these guys who he could rely on forever here, that were going to show up and vote at any election that he was in. He was going to get this small percentage of people out there to vote for him. And then slowly over time, after that Washington Post story hit, you kind of saw an erosion of the people who were going to hold their nose and vote for him among the Republicans here in this state. And because that's what a whole lot of Republicans were doing here, where they were going to hold their nose, vote for the Republican, toe the party line. And I think you lost a lot of those people as the story went further and further without any real answer from Roy Moore.
Now, there's a real question about also the backlash effect there, that if the Moore campaign and Trump coming back around to Moore and endorsing him explicitly, it could basically turn this into a story about the liberal media and the carpetbaggers and George Soros involved in some conspiracy. If they could rally folks, I guess I wonder how much traction do you think that kind of backlash stoking had?
You know, it's unclear to me, really, because I think a lot of the people that you heard that from were already those hardcore Roy Moore supporters. You know, they wanted to vote for Roy Moore, and they were out looking for reasons to do so. So they bought into the conspiracies of George Soros, which, I mean, come on, man. You know, I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, you know, it's just so foolish. It's just these people, these women here that they're talking about, you hear their friends and their family talk about them, and it's obvious they've lived in these towns their entire lives. You know, everybody knew them. Most people knew these stories who were close to these women. So the idea that all of a sudden George Soros has come in and you know, concocted this conspiracy to get rid of Roy Moore, it's just so absurd. You know, but people bought it because this was who they wanted to vote for, and they wanted to believe this nonsense.
Final question. How much, Charles Barkley had a line last night about, you know, we got to stop looking like idiots to the world. And of course, Barkley is an Alabama native. He was there for Doug Jones. How much do you think that's in the mind of voters about how Alabama looks to non-Alabamians?
I believe that's a big thing right now. I really, really do. I think there are a lot of good people in this state who have now seen us through the eyes of the national media, and they've taken a look at some of the goobers that we've put on TV over the last month here to say just ridiculously absurd things, and they are embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
They want to get rid of some of these people, and I mean, who could blame them if you've watched some of these interviews? And you know, I think that this is it's a real turning point, or it could be.
All right, Josh Moon, thanks for joining me tonight. I've appreciated your analysis throughout this race.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, as we look at the very early returns in the Alabama Senate race, the race is still at this hour too early to call. There's only 1% of precincts in. Our coverage of tonight's election continues, including one Democratic congresswoman's calls to take precautionary measures to protect teenagers working on Capitol Hill in the event that Roy Moore wins tonight. That story next.
And actions are going to speak louder than words. All this mess is going to be over tomorrow with a vote. The verdict rests on the people of Alabama.
4, 3, 2.
We're back with live coverage of the special Senate election in Alabama, where the votes are still being counted. And right now, NBC News is characterizing the race as too early to call. We've got 1% in if you look in that upper right-hand corner there. So those results essentially meaningless at this hour, the 70% and the 30%. Now, Republican Roy Moore is hoping voters will essentially absolve him tonight of multiple credible allegations of sexual misconduct, some involving teenage girls as young as 14. He's trying to follow the same path laid out by the president last year. Win the election, case closed. But even if Moore wins tonight, it will not be the end of this story, because if Moore wins, he will be walking into the Capitol just as other male lawmakers are being kicked out for allegations of their own. In that climate, some of his fellow Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, are already calling for Moore to undergo an ethics investigation if and when he gets to Washington. Across the aisle, Democrats aren't waiting for the final results tonight to prepare for Moore's arrival. In a recent letter to the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Congresswoman Gwen Moore called for new protections for Senate pages, writing, "It would be unconscionable for Congress to not be vigilant and proactive in taking precautions to safeguard these children, given the well-sourced allegations against Roy Moore." And if the president is the model for moving beyond sexual misconduct allegations, the past few days don't offer Roy Moore a ton of hope. Some of the president's own accusers are back in the spotlight, demanding a Me Too moment of their own. Dozens of Democrats in Congress are now calling for an investigation into the president's behavior, and a growing number of Senate Democrats are calling on the president to resign immediately from office. Now, Trump being Trump, he could not resist dumping gasoline on that particular fire. His choice words for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand next. After a number of women let's start with the results. The Alabama Senate race, of course, polls closed about 32 minutes ago. We have just 1% in. Doug Jones there on the left, Roy Moore on the right. Of course, it's going to be a long night if precedent is anything in Alabama, where it takes quite a while, and we do not know what this race will do tonight. It is characterized as too early to call at this moment, although we have our very own Steve Kornacki, who's working on some precinct-by-precinct data that might give us a little bit of a clue. We're going to go to him in a little bit. Now, after a number of women came forward yet again to describe being groped or harassed by the man who is now president of the United States, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand became the latest Senate Democrat to call on the president to resign yesterday. She's been a leader on the issue of sexual assault in the military and was the first colleague to publicly call on Senator Al Franken to resign over his own misconduct allegations. And her comments yesterday appear to have gotten under the president's notoriously thin skin. He tweeted this morning at 8 a.m., "Lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not so long ago and would do anything for them, is now in the ring fighting against Trump. Very disloyal to Bill and crooked. Used." The president's apparent innuendo drew swift and forceful condemnation from Democrats on Capitol Hill, including Senator Gillibrand herself.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice. And I will not be silenced on this issue. Neither will the women who stood up to the president yesterday, and neither will the millions of women who have been marching since the Women's March to stand up against policies they do not agree with.
But according to White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders, there was nothing remotely suggestive about the president's tweet.
There's no way that this is sexist at all. This is simply talking about a system that we have that is broken, in which special interests control our government. And I don't think that there's probably many people that are more controlled by political contributions than the senator that the president referenced.
Congresswoman Jackie Spears, a Democrat from California, has been leading calls for congressional investigation of the allegations against the president. Let me start with what the president had to say about your colleague in the Senate, Kirsten Gillibrand. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is actually one of disbelief. When I first heard it, I kind of lost my breath. I thought, this grotesque statement by the President of the United States, which suggests that virtually any woman in this country, how dare you? How dare you demean another woman in that manner? How dare you be the President of the United States and conduct yourself in that manner? He is so ill-equipped to be the president, and every day there's yet another tweet to substantiate that.
You know, the idea of investigating him in Congress over the allegations that are already public and already on the record and have been in most cases for over a year has really picked up steam recently. You've been calling for that. What would that even look like?
Well, we have requested that the Government Affairs and Oversight Committee take on that responsibility. Trey Gowdy this evening sent a letter saying this is criminal conduct and should be looked at by the Department of Justice, and so we're referring it there. Interesting approach to take. I think what's most important is that these 19 women who have called out the president for what was sexual harassing conduct at different times in their lives should be aired. We should hear from them. Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the UN by the president, a fellow Republican, has said these women should be heard, and we've got to create a forum so they can be.
Do you think all of this, do you think the president thought that he would never have to hear about this again after he won? And how do you think he feels about having to hear about it again?
Well, I think it does get under his skin. I think what is most disturbing about it is how he so swiftly says they lied. They lied. Women don't lie about this. Women are very loath to come forward. 70% of those who are sexually harassed never, ever report it because they are fearful of what will happen. Retaliation, having them looked upon as being liars, and all of that, I think, bodes for not coming forward. So if they're willing to come forward, there is truth to what they're saying.
This is a question, personal question. I'd like you to answer honestly if you can. Roy Moore might be elected to the United States Senate tonight, and I imagine there's some professional context in which, even though you serve in different houses, you would meet Roy Moore, stand across from him. What would you do?
Well, I wouldn't shake his hand. I probably wouldn't even recognize his existence. He shouldn't be in the Senate, but that's something the Senate's going to have to decide for itself. They have talked about referring it to the Ethics Committee, and that is the appropriate place to which it should be sent.
All right, Congresswoman Jackie Speier, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Rebecca Tracer is writer-at-large for New York Magazine, where she profiled Senator Gillibrand just a few months ago. I want to get to Gillibrand, but since we have Alabama sort of rolling in the background here, this does seem to me tonight, whatever happens, but particularly were Moore to win, another moment when it's like you're loading the spring of the backlash, you know, of the anger that folks feel about people getting away with this.
Right. It depends on which version of the backlash you're talking about. But yeah.
I mean the backlash against
the normalization of harassment, assault, and accepted gender discrimination in our public sphere and workplaces. Yeah. No, I'd say that there's backlash to that. And yeah, I think you are loading the spring. But on the other hand, if he loses, it's going to tell us how rampant the anger already is and the kind of electoral power it's having. And we have evidence of that even in the fact that the election is it looks to be that it might be as close as it's going to be. I mean, this is unheard of in Alabama for a crucial Senate seat, for a seat that the Republicans need. The fact that it's going to be close at all, if it indeed is going to be, it looks like it may be, that is telling us a lot about how much this issue and the broader issue of sexism is beginning to have an electoral impact. And you can see that from the Virginia elections, the special elections that took place last week in Georgia's 6th local elections, where Democratic women won. I think we're beginning to see electoral reverberations here that are real.
It's an interesting point because so much of the commentary tends to be like, well, it's Alabama and he's still Roy Moore, and how is this even close? But that point I think is an important one. Like, and this is something that people have been saying, which is that the allegations have had a big impact. This is a close race right now because a significant portion of people do believe these women.
Donald Trump won Alabama by 30 points. Yeah. Is that right? I mean, I think that's right. I mean, we also just elected Donald Trump president. I mean, the speed at which these things were furious.
It's just a year ago.
It was just a year ago we elected Donald Trump president. The speed at which these things change, and there's fascinating polling that was released last week by a pollster named Teresa Undum about the speed with which the interest in looking at sexual harassment as related to the kind of power that men have, that interest is spreading to Republicans, to Trump supporters. You know,
that's interesting.
There are huge numbers across partisan divides that are now saying, A, Trump himself should be investigated, that sitting lawmakers should be investigated. Those numbers are now at 75% and often higher.
70% say Congress should investigate allegations against Trump. And the reason that's so striking to me is you never see a poll with 70%. Basically, every poll is the same poll.
Right.
It's 66-33 because it's really a question about, like, are you in Trump's team or not?
And that polling data was done by a pollster who did similar polling after last year's election in 2016. And I really recommend that you go and look at this polling because the jumps have been tremendous in a year's time.
Quickly on Gillibrand, what the heck?
Well, when I saw the tweet, I actually thought to myself, am I being an oversensitive feminist here? That I think that maybe the president is calling a sitting senator a prostitute?
You texted me that.
I did. I was like, am I just being thin-skinned? You know, it's the kind of thing that is unbelievable, but also in the category of things that are unbelievable this year, it sort of is right on the nose.
And sort of central to who he is.
Essential to who he is, and also central to the kinds of power abuses that are at stake in the conversations about harassment to begin with, the sexualizing, demeaning, and degrading women, even if without touching them.
He sexually harassed her in front of the country amidst a conversation, national conversation, sexual harassment. Rebecca Traister, great to have you here.
Thank you.
Our coverage continues in that Alabama Senate race. Steve Kornacki's got some new information about which way this election's headed right after this short commercial break. Do not go away. Joining me now to break down the latest batch of exit poll data and precincts reporting hot off the presses, MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, what do you got?
Yeah, look, it's skeletal, it's sketchy, it's early. You see only about 25,000 votes. Jones out to the early lead. I mean, it just all depends where it's coming from. You can't read too much into that. We kind of want to look at the particular areas of the state. Let me just dive into one county here in a second, but just very quickly, again, the bottom line strategy here, if you're Jones, is you're looking for a huge number out of Birmingham. We only have one precinct in Jefferson County here. You're looking to win up here in the Huntsville metro area. You're looking to win in Mobile. You're looking to eat into the Republican suburban base around here. So that's sort of the path that Jones is cutting. Now, from Moore's standpoint, what you want is you want giant numbers out of the rural areas. And here's where it gets a little interesting. We have one county where we've got about half the vote in right now. Otherwise, we're looking at scattered precincts. I want to show you. It's up in the northern part of the state here. It's Limestone County, right here on the border. Now, this is interesting because when Donald Trump ran last year in 2016, Donald Trump got 72% of the vote in this county. When Roy Moore ran for Chief Justice and nearly lost 5 years ago in 2012, he got 62% in this county. What is it looking like right now?
Wow.
Roy Moore running basically at the level, even, you know, we'll see. It's a half the vote in, about 40%. But again, the question in these rural counties, especially for Moore, was, can he improve on what he did in 2012 when he nearly lost? Because Trump, this is the part of the state when you're basically looking north of Birmingham and take out Huntsville. Every other county here, Trump basically improved significantly. It was his best improvement over Mitt Romney in 2012. So if you think the Trumpification of politics, the polarization that comes with that might boost Moore, you would want Moore, if you're his campaign, to be running better than he did in 12 in these counties. Again, we'll see when the rest of the precincts come in there, but that's the level you want to see in that county if you're Jones.
We should note that he did win that. He won that race, that state Supreme Court race. He eked it out by, I think, about 1 point.
3 points.
3 points, right. But also interesting data there. One of the questions I think a lot of people have been asking is, what about write-ins, right? There was talk of a write-in. Richard Shelby goes on the Sunday shows to say he wrote in the name of a prominent Republican. So you've got this sort of idea, well, I'm going to write someone in. But at the same time, it's such a bizarre time to have an election. It's hard to imagine people getting in the car, driving to the precinct location, and then writing in someone. That indicates around 2%, shows that it's not an enormous effect at this point.
Yeah, and look, you had one candidate who kind of emerged about 2 weeks ago named Lee Busby. From what I could tell, that boom that lasted about 6 hours.
Right.
He didn't seem to make much of a splash. I think a lot of people kind of felt, if you're going to go to the trouble of coming out and voting in this election, everybody knows the stakes. Everybody knows what's on the line, what the story is. That means you have a preference here for who wins or maybe who loses. But to go and put the write-in vote doesn't seem like many people were interested in that.
My takeaway here from this Limestone County, from what you've said, is that if you're the Jones folks, you look at that number, you say they haven't put us out yet. Roy Moore is not running away with this race at 8:47, and the dominoes are going to start to fall. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, and again, basically it's two games here for Jones. It's hold your own in these rural areas.
That's
relative to how Clinton did against Trump last year. And right now, it's limited and scattered evidence, and we got to see when these big counties come in. But again, you look at the one county where we have the most vote right now. If you're Jones, that's what you want to see coming out of that county.
That's very useful. Steve Kornacki, thank you.
All right.
With me now from a Doug Jones event in Gadsden, Alabama, is Dave Weigel, national political correspondent for the Washington Post. Gadsden is the hometown of Roy Moore, the place where he somewhat infamously, according to reports, was banned from the mall. What are you hearing there?
Well, the first precinct in the county, which we need to find where it was a landslide for Jones. But this is an area where Democrats, for a lot of reasons, organized very well. They knew some of the victims personally, or some of the accusers, I should say, in the Moore situation. And they, at this party, were telling me they really had not had a race that did not see their party in decline, losing members, seeing people switch in decades. So this was a galvanizing event, and when people were turning out the polls, they were the 50th person. When on election day for a presidential race, they were like the 30th.
You put in so many miles covering races and politics in this country from all over the place. What has struck you being on the ground in Alabama?
You know, lawn signs don't vote. I've learned that lesson the hard way. Lots of political reporters have. But I don't think I've ever seen as many lawn signs for a candidate since the 2011, 12, I should say, recall attempt against Scott Walker. Every single Scott Walker reporter wanted you to know that he was a Scott Walker supporter. And in this race, everyone wanted that totem on their lawn saying they were backing Doug Jones, they were not backing Roy Moore. I was in counties, you're seeing Steve points them out tonight, counties where Donald Trump won by 50 points, and I'd drive through a block, I'd look up the economic data because that's how my brain is, and I'd see 5 Doug Jones signs in a place that went very strongly for Trump, that was fairly well educated, fairly wealthy. It was hard to miss that if you spent any time in this state. People who were voting for Roy Moore, and even if you went to a deep rural area, you did not see the kind of grassroots support, certainly that you saw for Donald Trump, but even for state Senate candidates.
All right, Dave Weigel, the great Dave Weigel, who's got more frequent flyers than almost anyone in the business. Thanks for joining us. Still to come, tonight's no-win situation for the Republican Party. They either lose the Senate seat to a Democrat, or a man accused of child molestation is a Republican in the U.S. Senate. Rick Wilson, Jason Johnson, join me next.
Fake news would tell you that we don't care for Jews. One of our attorneys is a Jew. We had very close friends that are Jewish and rabbis, and we also fellowship with them.
That was Kayla Moore, wife of Roy Moore, on stage last night reading prepared remarks to prove that her husband does not hate Jews. And that man, the man that was standing behind her, the man you see there, that's the man Republicans will have to deal with in 2018. A senator from Alabama who stands accused of child molestation with a history of bigoted statements and defies the rule of law if he is able to win tonight. Even though it remains to be seen how establishment Republicans will deal with Senator Roy Moore, 61% of Americans want the Senate to expel Roy Moore if he wins. Even 45% of Republicans agree. With me now is Rick Wilson, Republican strategist, and Jason Johnson, MSNBC political analyst, professor at Morgan State University. And Rick, let me start with, right now it appears to be it's very early, but basically in the dead heat-ish range. Too early to call is the official characterization. You've got some benchmarks that are being hit by each side. Let's start with the if Moore wins scenario. One thing that occurred to me when I saw that 61% number in polling is that Donald Trump has a certain kind of charisma that Roy Moore doesn't have. And Roy Moore strikes me as a pretty toxic figure and a pretty regionally intense figure for national Republicans to have to carry around. What do you think about that?
Well, I completely agree with that, Chris. And the problem with Roy Moore is, he is a guy who has been an edge case even in Alabama, the reddest state in the country. Roy Moore has always underperformed even people like Mitt Romney in statewide races in Alabama. So the specificity of Roy Moore's particular political flavor is not something that you can scale beyond the non-metro regions of Alabama. That may still be enough to pull him over the finish line tonight, but the toxicity of Roy Moore's overall brand, the fact that, let's not forget, Roy Moore is sexually attracted to teenage girls, that's going to stick with him. That's going to be a problem. And if the Democrats, are disciplined and smart about it, they will turn the fact that he's going to get seated in the U.S. Senate, and that for all the brave talk, I honestly believe that the caucus will do nothing. They'll launch an ethics investigation and nothing will happen. That's going to be something that if the Democrats were smart, they would hang more around our necks. And if Roy Moore's smart, he will he'll play his little game with Steve Bannon and make himself into a star of the new right and further poison and destroy the Republican brand.
Yeah, he's got every incentive to perform quite a bit. You know, one of the things that happens in a race like this is a reminder of what the racial politics of the South look like and how intense they are and how sort of racial and partisan lines have sort of lined up. And what it brings you to, it seems to me, is that if Roy Moore's your nominee, you can actually send him to the U.S. Senate because of how that structure works.
Right. We just saw this in Atlanta, right? People will cross-party for race all the time. And so Roy Moore is somebody who is going to benefit from the fact that not only have Democrats not broken over 40% in the state, running statewide in almost 20 years, but also the fact that you have a tremendous amount of voter ID, voter suppression, the places that, I've been seeing reports on Twitter and talking to people who are reporting from the root that areas that are primarily black voter areas have fewer voting machines. I mean, all these different structural and cultural dynamics come into play.
We should say it is statistically the case that there are about 300 more voters per precinct in predominantly black precincts in Alabama than in white precincts.
Yes. And with fewer and fewer machines. All that being said, though, what's been interesting is, what I've been reading is that there's a lot more effort in this race because people actually believe there's a chance here. The NAACP is making more phone calls this year than they did in 2016. They figured they were a lost cause in 2016. The NAACP has spent more money in putting people on the ground this year. So you could see a change. I don't necessarily think it'll lead to him not winning.
Well, there's also that question about that 30% number. I mean, 30% black electorate is a number that not a lot of people were bandying about before the end of the night. We don't know if that's definitive. So, Rick, let's go the flip side. I mean, I remember I was in Washington, D.C. covering the White House, The Nation magazine, the morning after Scott Brown won. And I remember walking into this desultory, running into a Democratic member of Congress who just looked like he'd been hit over the head. He had this glassy-eyed look of complete despair. What would it mean for the Republicans if they woke up tomorrow to a Doug Jones win?
Well, what it would mean is that they would have to furrow their brows and express deep concern, or perhaps, even worry significantly that Donald Trump was doing something to the Republican Party that, just wasn't as positive as they had hoped. They won't understand that the cancer that's eating them is Steve Bannon and Donald Trump. It's not something external. It's caused by those two people inside, who are chewing their way through the carcass of the GOP. And they don't care about the damage. Trump and Bannon don't care about the damage that guys like Mitch McConnell are going to have to patch up if Doug Jones wins tomorrow. I mean, it should be a shock. It won't be a shock. There's a delusional bubble around Trumpism that has poisoned their ability to really think their way out of the problem.
Here's the other problem. If Roy Moore wins, then you have to deal with Roy Moore.
Yeah.
And if you look at everything in his personality, the way he's talked to people, the way he deals with Republicans in the state, he's like...
The way he dealt with his Supreme Court judicial colleagues who hated him.
Kicked off twice. Look, you think about how much everybody dislikes Ted Cruz because he's a know-it-all, he's obnoxious. Roy Moore is like Ted Cruz with a Bible, right? It's going to be worse. He's going to be lecturing people, but he's not going to be a reliable vote. I don't see how this is a win for Republicans on any level.
Yeah, and there is really this question to Rick, to your point about... We're seeing the same dynamics that made Donald Trump the President of the United States by first making him the Republican Party nominee at play in this race in Alabama. And the open question tonight is whether this is the bridge too far. Even the Republican voters of Alabama, the state Donald Trump won by 30 points, cannot bring themselves to send Roy Moore to the United States Senate. Rick Wilson and Jason Johnson, thank you for joining us. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. This is a fun day to be in the jobs that we have.
Fascinating. Honestly, one of the most fascinating races I have ever had occasion to cover.
And so many things to watch and monitor and pay attention to and contextualize. And this is one of these days that I am super grateful to be here.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
Thank you, my friend.